Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you to Oncology Classroom evening session. Today evening, we are going to discuss surgical management of locally advanced lung cancer. And this lecture will be delivered by Dr. Shuyeb Zaidi, who is a senior consultant and robotic surgeon in the Department of Surgical Oncology at Indraprastha Apollo Hospitals, New Delhi. Dr. Zaidi has his keen interest in thoracic oncology, and we are thankful to have him today in this evening session. Very warm welcome to you, Dr. Zaidi, and without wasting any further time, may I now request you to please take over this session and start your presentation. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for the kind words, Dr. Mandal. I regret that I could not do the class last time, and I asked for some 15 minutes, delay in the class today. So anyway, we will start today's session without wasting further time. So today we will discuss about management of locally advanced lung cancer, especially the surgical aspect. Now we all know that it is the commonest cancer in India in men. 7% of all new cases and 10% of cancer-related deaths. Highest incidences in Mizoram and all urban India. You can skip these slides. Now, I'll just start because it's a class. I will start from the basics, diagnosis. I will just very briefly, all of you know about symptoms of lung cancer. What we must look at when we see a patient, we should look for signs of, advanced cancer, especially patient with hoarseness of voice, which indicates recurrent laryngeal nerve involvement, patient with neck swelling, which indicates N3 disease, congestion of the face and neck indicates this superior vena cava syndrome, patients with fracture, bone pains, CNS symptoms. It's very important to note all these things, and it's not to miss any clinical signs. We should look for advanced, cancer symptoms like tachypnea, dyspnea, superior vena cava syndrome, Horner syndrome. I'm sure all of you know Horner syndrome, and a Pancoast syndrome of shoulder pain, Horner syndrome, and upper apical tumor. Patients with pleural effusion, recurrent nerve palsy, phrenic nerve palsy, which can be easily seen with a pattern of breathing, or on the simple chest X-ray. Patients who have impending obstruction like tracheal obstruction or bronchial obstruction, and so on. Now, a simple X-ray, we should have high index of suspicion for this lung cancer, which is a central lesion, which, similar picture can be seen in patients with, unfolding of aorta. Another, this is early lung cancer. We can skip this. This patient, a right paratracheal node. You can see this also can be easily missed by, inexperienced doctors. This indicates N2 disease, stage 3 lung cancer. Now coming to this cavitating lesion, another advanced lung cancer. On this side, you can see a huge central lesion in the left hilum. Similarly, you see this patient came early, and this was a lesion, and but the patient defaulted, and later on presented with advanced lesion, collapsed lung. You can see the upper lobe collapsed, and that window of opportunity was lost. Most often, we get lung cancers in advanced stages, stage 3 or stage 4, or only around 15 to 10% lung cancer comes in early stage. We should assess the patient. Most important is tissue diagnosis, followed by staging investigations and investigations related to the fitness and treatment. So non-invasive investigations are X-ray, CT, sputum cytology, and tissue diagnosis. All of us know CT guided biopsy, bronchoscopy, and lavage, and transbronchial needle aspiration or endobronchial ultrasound for staging purpose. So we must not forget to do MRI brain if we have done along with the routine CT or a PET CT. MRI brain it's most often missed because we think that we have done a PET CT, and PET CT is whole body. and it will include brain also, but the sensitivity of picking up brain lesions, metastatic lesions, on a PET CT is very low. So we must do MRI brain routinely, except for very early lesions. Coming to invasive investigations, invasive investigations are related to the invasive staging, transthoracic needle aspiration, transbronchial needle aspiration, endobronchial ultrasound, endoscopic ultrasound, fluid cytology, thoracoscopy, mediastinoscopy or mediastinotomy, and thoracotomy. I think we have already discussed the staging. Just to be relevant for this class, the advanced lung cancer, we take it as stage 3, stage 4. Though in my opinion, T3N0, which is stage 2B lung cancer, also should come in the advanced category. However, for all practical purposes, T3, T4 lesions, patients with stage 3A, 3B disease, it's considered locally advanced lung cancer. So T3 disease more than 5 centimeter, but less than 7 centimeter in greatest dimension, with involvement of the parietal pleura, chest wall. So this includes superior sulcus tumors, phrenic nerve involvement, parietal pericardium, separate tumor nodules in the same lobe as a primary. So this was considered, this is the last, separate tumor nodules in the same lobe was considered T4 disease in the last AJCC 7, but now it is considered T3. Similarly, stage 4 is more than 7 centimeter tumor involving diaphragm, mediastinum, adjacent organs like heart, great vessels, trachea, recurrent laryngeal nerve, esophagus, and so on. And the ipsilateral lobe tumor nodule is considered T4. Previously, it was considered M1. This is the stage grouping. So we will be discussing basically about stage 3A disease, this spectrum, which includes T1 to T4, and T1, T2 will be with N2, and T3, T4 will be with N0 and N1 disease. And 3B, usually most of these cases will be in the, they will be suitable for radiation. So we will not be discussing about 3B. Now, coming to, these, this is the mediastinal staging, non-invasive mediastinal staging. You can do either with a CT chest, contrast CT chest, or a PET CT. You can see a bulky nodal mass in the pretracheal and the paratracheal area on the right side, whereas this mediastinum looks normal. There are small nodes, but still, if the primary tumor size is locally advanced, then we need to do mediastinal staging in all cases. Now, why mediastinal staging is important? We must. As you see, the survival going down. This is the clinical N0 stage. With clinical N0, the survival is 5-year, 50%. With N1, the survival drops by 10, 11%, 39%. With N2, clinical N2, clinical N2 does not mean that patient is N2 disease positive. Clinical N2 only indicates that the N2 nodes are enlarged. And if we take this as a group, then their survival is 31%. Some of these patients with clinical N2 positive disease will turn out to be pathologically N2 negative. So coming to pathological staging. So PN0, the staging, the 5-year survival is 56%. PN1, it drops to 38%. And PN2, when you actually, prove that the lymph nodes in the N2 station are positive, the survival drops to 22%. And N3, the survival is only 6%. As you just compare the survival in stage 3A, 24%, and B, 9%, and stage 1 is 7%. So it's very important, to assess the stage at the outset. So this, this very important topic of study of lymphatic drainage in non-small cell lung cancer patients. Dr. T. Naruke, he is a pioneer in lung cancer lymph nodal classification. And when I went to Japan for fellowship, the same month before I joined there, Dr. Naruke, he expired at the age of 72 while he was practicing judo. He's an absolutely fit person, and he studied drainage pattern in more than 1,000 patients. And this is the classification of lung cancer, which was initially restricted to the Japanese, but this has been accepted in last 10 years by the AJCC as well. You see,
Sir, your voice is not audible. Sir, can you please share your screen again? Sir, please unmute yourself.
can you see now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Sorry if there was some network issue. So coming to lymph nodal station in lung cancer, it starts with, these are the mediastinal nodal stations, starting with one. One is actually not mediastinal, it is a cervical station at the root of neck, followed by number two. Number two can be divided into 2R and 2L. I'm sure, I think this must have been studied in the previous classes as well. I'll just quickly run through this. 4R and 4L, that is on the lower paratracheal, 2 is upper paratracheal, 10 is hilar. Technically 10 is not a mediastinal lymph node. Then 11, 12, 13, 14 are, lobar, interlobar, segmental and subsegmental stations. On the left side, we have para-aortic and the aortopulmonary window station, number 5. And similarly, 4L on the left side. So number 1 is the highest mediastinal. As I discussed all these stations, a similar picture. Now, it is very important for us to know the mediastinal stage. The entire treatment depends upon the clinical stage, followed by invasive staging, confirmed by biopsy. So invasive staging is done by either cervical mediastinoscopy, which is the commonest procedure. However, because it involves you taking the patient in the operation theater, it is expensive. Nowadays, we have got EBUS and transbronchial needle aspiration. So we are more often doing EBUS in most patients because it's outpatient procedure, and it is, technically simpler and cheaper. And the third thing is endoscopic ultrasound, which is not commonly used except for sampling specific stations of number 8 and number 9. Number 8 being this bronchial, periesophageal, and number 9 is at the level of inferior pulmonary vein. Now, this is the cervical mediastinoscopy. We go in the anterior mediastinum and just in front of the trachea. And you see, we can sample station number 2, station number 4, anterior subcarinal group of stations in the standard mediastinoscopy. So it is still considered gold standard, where we are not able to get tissue or where we are not able to sample lymph nodes on EBUS. We have to go and do a mediastinoscopy. The sensitivity is 80%, specificity 50 to 100%. False negative rate is 10%. The flip side of mediastinoscopy is invasive and expensive, and posterior subcarinal node is very difficult to sample. And patients who do not want surgery and patients who are not candidates for surgery may have to undergo surgical staging, and that too invasive staging. So the morbidity of this procedure is very low. Almost, most patients can undergo this procedure. It's an outpatient procedure. We can do it in the morning and discharge the patient in the afternoon. We can sample both because, the approach is in the midline. We can sample both ipsilateral and contralateral nodes and take sample from most of the stations. And negative predictive value for N2 disease is 10%. Now coming to the procedure, we have to make a small incision in the suprasternal notch, as you see here. And after making an incision, we identify the trachea, and the pretracheal fascia is opened like this. The trachea is then visualized. After opening the pretracheal fascia, this plane which is anterior to the trachea, between the trachea and the great vessels, we develop this plane with the help of a finger. We must take care of these small blood vessels which supply the inferior poles of the thyroid gland. You see this procedure. I've just, this is a open procedure, the suprasternal notch incision, around 2 centimeter incision. You see we have made a plane. This is the trachea, and the plane is made anterior to the trachea and between the great vessels. This is the innominate artery running horizontally, and this will ascend here to, continue as a carotid artery and the subclavian artery on the other side. So this innominate between these vascular and this trachea, we go and take out the lymph nodes. Through the same, opening, we introduce a mediastinoscope, which can be a video mediastinoscope or a normal scope. As you see, the patient is, made to lie in supine position with the pad under the shoulder to extend the neck. Incision is given, a finger is introduced to make a plane like this. You can see we can palpate the all great vessels. We can go on both sides of the trachea and anterior to the trachea to feel for the lymph nodes, and then a mediastinoscope is introduced inside this pretracheal space. Okay, and then we can visualize the lymph nodes in the midline, precarinal, pretracheal, paratracheal, and the subcarinal. The advantage of having a video scope is the especially good for the teaching purpose, because everybody can see in the OT. Otherwise, without a video scope, only the surgeon who is operating will get to see the lymph nodes and the entire surgical field. And you see the procedure being performed. This is the mediastinoscope. Okay, so this is for the visualization. If you have a video scope, then this can be connected to the monitor for everybody to see. You see the endoscopic view. The mediastinoscope is inside. This is the trachea. You can see the tracheal cartilages and the small blood vessels. Usually there is loose areolar tissue which can be dissected and blood vessels taken care of with the cautery. And we must maintain the hemostasis so that the vision is perfect and we are able to visualize the lymph node. You see this pretracheal fascia being lifted, and as we go on the right and the left side, you can see the lymph nodes. This is a schematic diagram. The lymph nodes on the left side, on the right side, in the subcarinal area can be sampled. The anatomy of the mediastinoscopy, as we go down in front of the trachea, we see as we go towards the carina, the pulmonary artery crosses it. So we must be, our plane of dissection should be exactly on the trachea without deviating here and there. And if the plane deviates, then we are likely to injure the great vessels. You see, this is a azygous vein coming here. This is the superior vena cava. And this is trachea with the lymph nodes here. You can see, this is the bifurcation, exactly the same area, carina. You can see the station number 7, subcarinal node, which is the anterior subcarinal node, because our approach is anterior. So the anterior subcarinal node can be visualized. The advantage of mediastinoscope is that, all the structures, like the vascular structures, which are anteriorly placed, these structures are pushed anteriorly with the help of mediastinoscope, and we are able to visualize the lymph nodes. you can see the right pulmonary artery anteriorly. One must be very, very careful, because if we injure it, then the patient will lose a lot of blood in seconds. So whenever we do mediastinoscopy, we always prepare the chest completely, and we ask the nurse to keep the median sternotomy saw ready, so that just in case if you have any mishap, we immediately open the sternum and then take care of the bleeding. So mediastinoscopy should never be done uh, in the absence, if you don't have the setup to open the chest, especially the median sternotomy. So you see the mediastinoscopy being done. This is the esophagus. You can see the fibers. We are anterior to the trachea, and on the left side, because the esophagus is slightly on the left, so we are able to visualize the fibers of the esophagus, and you can see the lymph nodes which are being sampled here. So when we do a mediastinoscopy, we should at least sample 2 ipsilateral lymph node levels, 1 contralateral lymph node level, and a subcarinal level. Okay, so, whenever we have patients with N1 or N2 disease, or with negative mediastinum, we are always worried about the N3 lymph nodes, the contralateral lymph nodes, because if we find contralateral lymph node, the management changes drastically. And of course, ipsilateral lymph nodes, whether the lymph nodes, N2 nodes are present or not, we must know. So this is study the accuracy of mediastinoscopy in different studies. The negative predictive value in general is around 0.9%, and sensitivity is around 80-81%. So then we have some more techniques like video assisted mediastinal lymphadenectomy, which is a more it's kind of lymphadenectomy which is done through the suprasternal notch. Similar procedure, we take out most of the lymph node stations, okay, and it can be done as an extended procedure for patients where more widespread lymph node involvement is suspected, or some people, if they find that the lymph nodes are negative, they prefer to do VAMLA, because what happens after mediastinoscopy, sometimes the planes between the great vessels and the trachea are disturbed. So at the time of final surgery, for example, if you have to go and give chemotherapy to the patient, then when patient comes later on for surgery, then the planes are usually fibrosed. So if the nodes are negative, then the mediastinal lymphadenectomy is completed by video assisted mediastinal lymph node lymphadenectomy. There is another procedure called TEMLA, transcervical extended mediastinal lymphadenectomy, okay, which also includes, if we extend our field of mediastinoscopy on the left side to include the station 5, which is subaortic, and the aortopulmonary window, or a para-aortic, station 6. So we just have to deviate our mediastinoscope slightly to the left side to run over the aorta, and then that will be called transcervical extended mediastinal lymphadenectomy. So another procedure which is sometimes done, restaging mediastinoscopy in patients where we have done the staging initially and the N2 nodes were positive, and we have taken the patient for neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And after neoadjuvant chemotherapy, we just want to know whether the nodes are negative now or not, because negative nodes, negative N2 nodes after neoadjuvant chemotherapy indicates better prognosis compared to patients who have persistent N2 positive nodes. So there is another procedure called anterior mediastinotomy. Anterior mediastinotomy is reserved for stations number 5 and 6, because commonly extended mediastinoscopy is not done for these lesions because of the technical problems or lack of expertise. These lymph nodes which are on the aorta and on the pulmonary artery, these are sampled. We either can go through the suprasternal notch. You can see the scope, slightly moved onto the left side over the aorta to sample these nodes. This requires technical expertise and equipment as well. And the other option is to give one incision in the second space, which is also called as Chamberlain's procedure. A small incision is given, and pectoralis major muscle is incised, and followed by intercostal muscles and the pleura. and then the lymph nodes are directly, palpated, and we can introduce a small scope inside, or we can spread the ribs, limited spread of the ribs, to visualize the lymph nodes and sample them. So this is for those where we are unable to sample station 5 and 6, usually the left-sided tumors. So now the restaging of mediastinum is done sometimes, but restaging mediastinoscopy is sometimes technically difficult, and can we can have some complications also, because the vascular structures sometimes they get adhered to the trachea. So another modality, the next modality, which is more commonly utilized in staging compared to mediastinoscopy, is EBUS, endobronchial ultrasound guided transbronchial needle aspiration. So it's a minimally invasive modality. It's an endoscopic modality with very high sensitivity, 85 to 96%. And it's a real-time procedure. The bronchoscopy is done, and there's a special bronchoscope for this particular purpose. And there is a ultrasound with the Doppler facility at the tip, and the anatomy is luminal anatomy as well as the mediastinal anatomy is visualized. This is the equipment. You can see a scope with the tip having this ultrasound, miniature ultrasound, and different types of scopes are available with, these are the diameter specifications mentioned. And you can see this needle coming out from here. There's a balloon to create a interface between the trachea and the mediastinal organs and lymph nodes, and you can see the needle which can be passed, guided by the ultrasound. The lymph node which are usually assessed by EBUS are station number 2. 2 is upper paratracheal, 3 is the retrotracheal, 4, 7, 10, 11, 12. Okay. EBUS station number 8 and 9 cannot be sampled with the endobronchial ultrasound, because station 9 being the inferior pulmonary ligament lymph nodal station, and 8 is periesophageal. So these lymph node stations are cannot be sampled. All other stations can be sampled with a endobronchial ultrasound. Station 5 and 6 on the left side will not be amenable to this staging procedure. Now, yield of the procedure is very good. Around sensitivity is 0.93%, specificity is 1, and now this procedure is because it's simpler, it's cheaper, and it is readily available. And nowadays, most chest physicians, they are able to do this endobronchial ultrasound, and usually this is the first invasive staging procedure of choice. What happens in patients where the lymph node size is normal, and so almost for normal lymph nodes, the TBNA endobronchial ultrasound can miss up to 28% of lymph nodes. So when the lymph nodes are normal, then the accuracy goes down, and then we have to go and resort to mediastinoscopy or surgical staging. Now coming to endoscopic ultrasound, this is done transesophageally, and it is possible to sample station 3P, retrotracheal, because retrotracheal station is anterior to the esophagus, so it's simpler to sample the station. Upper and lower paratracheal, usually on both sides, but it's easier to sample the upper and the lower paratracheal on the left side because of the slight deviation of the esophagus to the left side. Subcarinal can be sampled easily, and these two stations 8 and 9, which cannot be sampled by mediastinoscopy and endobronchial ultrasound, are very easy to sample with endoscopic ultrasound. Now, endoscopic staging, endoscopic ultrasound, as I discussed, 8 and 9 lymph nodes can be sampled. Other lymph nodes like hilar lymph nodes, cannot be reached. Left paratracheal is is accessible. The right paratracheal is very difficult to access, and it requires expertise. You can see the sensitivity and specificity 84 and 99%. Fine needle false negative rate is 19%. False positive rate is 0.4%. Most endoscopic ultrasound FNA studies, they look at enlarged lymph nodes, and overall prevalence of disease 61%. And usually patients who have smaller nodes, the yield may not be very high. The equipment is similar to endobronchial ultrasound. You can see the miniature ultrasound probe fitted at the tip, and the needle, different sizes needle can be used. Now, what are the indications of mediastinoscopy after we have done the endobronchial ultrasound? We sometimes, in most situations, we are able to, do staging with endobronchial ultrasound, whereas in certain situations, where we must do mediastinoscopy even after endobronchial ultrasound. That is when the lymph nodes are small, and our index of suspicion on imaging that the N2 nodes are involved is very high. So in other words, we are suspecting a false negative endobronchial ultrasound. This can happen in lymph nodes which are necrotic, and multiple passes through the necrotic lymph nodes. Sometimes we are unable to take to aspirate cells. Then we should remove the intact nodes with the help of mediastinoscopy. Areas which are difficult to access, we can do mediastinoscopy and remove the lymph nodes. Normal size lymph nodes, as I discussed earlier, the false negative rate is up to 28%. And station 5 and 6 involvement, we should do either mediastinoscopy or Chamberlain's procedure, mediastinotomy. Now, just to simplify things for students, these are the revised guidelines, 2014 guidelines, and the recent guidelines are also similar. We do a CT and the PET CT for staging, mediastinal node negative and the positive. So what do we do? If the nodes are negative, we can directly take the patient for surgery. We can confirm the negative nodes on PET or a CT with the help of endobronchial ultrasound or endoscopic ultrasound or mediastinoscopy, and then do surgery. So clinically negative node is proven to be pathologically negative, and then the surgery is performed. On the other hand, the clinically positive mediastinal lymph nodes are not taken as positive unless we prove prove on biopsy or cytology. So the tissue confirmation is very important. So after tissue confirmation, if the mediastinal nodes are positive, then we start with a multimodality treatment. And on the other hand, if the nodes are negative on EBUS and we are still suspecting that the lymph node may still be positive, we should do a standard surgical mediastinal staging and then prove them positive or negative and treat accordingly. So if a tumor is more than 3 centimeters, okay, with high FDG uptake, squamous carcinoma or more applicable for adenocarcinoma, we must do invasive mediastinal staging. So, what do we do, whether we should do mediastinoscopy or endobronchial ultrasound? It all depends upon the, logistics, availability of your expertise, the nodal stations which we have to sample. If you have to sample station 8 and 9, then we will not have to do mediastinoscopy. We'll have to go for endoscopic ultrasound first, and followed by the mediastinoscopy or endobronchial ultrasound. So we must know what is, what needs to be sampled, and we must know what do we have the equipment available in the hospital. If we have endobronchial ultrasound and if we don't have a mediastinoscope, then we should do endobronchial ultrasound as a procedure of choice. If endobronchial ultrasound is not available and if this expertise available to do mediastinoscopy, then mediastinoscopy should be done. So we should know what to sample and where to go. And all these choices are made based on the patient's comorbidity, logistics, imaging, availability of expertise, and the location of the primary tumor, and the kind of tissue needed. So just to simplify things, invasive staging, what I do normally, I use endobronchial ultrasound for diagnosis or endoscopic ultrasound, whichever is applicable. So it's a simple outpatient procedure, no general anesthesia needed. it does not cause any scarring of the mediastinal lymph node area, so that the if there's no scarring, the dissection subsequently at the time of surgery is very good. And I use mediastinoscopy if endoscopic ultrasound or EBUS are negative, and if the suspicion of mediastinal lymph node involvement is still high. So if we need a larger amount of tissue, for example, small nodes, normal looking nodes, and a bigger size primary, then we should use mediastinoscopy upfront, because we'll have to remove the intact lymph nodes, and then we may have to remove multiple lymph nodes. If we are planning for induction chemotherapy and followed by resection, then we can keep the mediastinoscopy in reserve for restaging. We do the EBUS first, and then restaging mediastinoscopy is done just before the surgical procedure, definitive surgical procedure. So normally when we do mediastinoscopy just before the surgical procedure, we tell the patient that if the nodes turn out to be positive, then we will be taking you for neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and we will abandon the opening the chest and the definitive resection. There are certain there are other situations also where we may have to sample lymph nodes, or sometimes the primary is not amenable to sampling, but the mediastinal node is accessible. But then also we can do mediastinoscopy to take the sample. And nowadays for lung cancer we need larger tissue for histopathology, for immunohistochemistry, for molecular studies, for NGS. So another procedure, staging procedure, thoracoscopy. It is done for if you are suspecting pleural disease, if there is a pleural thickening, and if it is not possible to do CT guided for smaller pleural deposits, then the thoracoscopy is utilized. Now, coming to treatment of locally advanced lung cancer, it is local or local regional surgery or radiation, and the systemic treatment, as we all know, chemotherapy, targeted therapy, immunotherapy, and so on. So stage 1 has been discussed already, stage 2 as well. We know that surgery is the treatment of choice. Now coming to locally advanced lung cancer, stage 3A. Stage 3A is T1, T2 along with N2 nodes, or T3, T4 along with N0, N1 nodes. If you have T3, T4 along with N2 nodes, that will be stage 3B. So that will, most such patients will go for radiation. Now the standard of care for stage 3A is either neoadjuvant chemotherapy followed by surgery, or in some centers, on some institutions, they practice concurrent chemo radiation. Now just to recapitulate the recent NCCN guidelines, the stage 3A and 3B cases. This is the pre-treatment evaluation, pulmonary function tests, bronchoscopy, mediastinal staging, not to forget the brain MRI with contrast. Contrast is very important because a plain brain MRI, we can miss small metastatic lesions. So if there is an issue about the spine, we can do MRI with contrast of the spine. Or patients who have superior sulcus tumor, we need MR angiography for assessment of the soft tissues as well as the important vascular structures which are likely to be involved in superior sulcus tumors, especially the subclavian artery, brachial plexus. And the FDG PET, in lung cancer, in all cases, I think there is a consensus that we should do a FDG PET scan, because in approximately at least 20-25% of cases, there may be upstaging of disease. So all these are locally, they come in the category of stage 3 lung cancer, superior sulcus tumors, chest wall resections for chest wall involvement, proximal airway involvement, T4 and 0 disease, and so on. Now coming to, I'll take these issues one by one. Superior sulcus tumors. Superior sulcus tumors are present in the apex of the lung, and they involve the ribs on the ipsilateral side, usually the first 2 or 3 ribs. And they very commonly involve subclavian artery, brachial plexus, and the soft tissues of the neck. So the patients who are potentially operable, the standard treatment is preoperative concurrent chemoradiation. Okay, usually the dose which is given is around 40 to 45 gray. Usually the dose is kept slightly on the lower side to avoid surgical complications. But we have seen most of these patients, they do well post preoperative neoadjuvant chemotherapy. We tell our radiation oncologist to avoid irradiating the hilum of the lung and the bronchus, because later on we will be doing lobectomy and the chest wall resection with the reconstruction. So the the bronchial stump dehiscence and the bronchopleural fistula can be avoided. Superior sulcus tumors can have T4 extension, for example, involvement of the vertebral bodies, involvement of the subclavian arteries. Then to make them resectable after preoperative concurrent chemoradiation, we should be able to resect them with negative margins along with adjacent organs like vertebra or ribs, or sometimes the superior vena cava and the subclavian artery. We can, if the involvement is limited, we can resect them and put a patch graft, or we can put a PTFE or Dacron graft. So resectable tumors, they undergo surgery after preoperative neoadjuvant chemoradiation. Unresectable tumors, the definitive chemoradiation is completed, followed by chemotherapy. And patients who are unresectable, they receive definitive chemoradiation followed by durvalumab. I think this is beyond the scope of this lecture. Now, patients who have chest wall involvement, they have chest wall involvement is considered T3 with N0 or N1 stations. The nodes either are absent or up to the hilar level they are involved. So it is called resectable or resectable T4. Resectable T4 is tumor involving chest wall and the vertebral bodies. So these tumors also, if the nodes are limited to the hilar region, then we can do surgery as the preferred option. As you can see the NCCN. And then adjuvant treatment can be decided based on the margin negativity and the positivity. Positive margins require either resection or chemoradiation, and negative margins will go for chemotherapy. Now coming to stage 3A, T4 and 0 and 1, sometimes we give concurrent chemoradiation followed by surgical evaluation and surgery, as we do in the superior sulcus tumors. Or sometimes when the chest wall involvement is such that we are suspecting, infiltrative lesion, so it is better to go for new preoperative chemotherapy to downstage, or preoperative concurrent chemoradiation followed by surgery. Though the chest wall resection after neoadjuvant chemoradiation becomes really messy, because these patients have reconstruction of the chest wall with mesh and a muscle flap, okay, for the cover. And these patients initially have a paradoxical breathing. They are put on elective ventilation for a couple of days post surgery. And so if the healing is poor, then the wound dehiscence can be very disastrous. So patients who have T3A, stage 3A, unresectable tumors because of the volume or because of any technical problems, then they receive concurrent chemoradiation. So now stage 1 and T1 to T3 and 0 or N1, resectable tumors, they undergo surgical resection with mediastinal lymph node dissection and or sampling, and then followed by adjuvant treatment. And patients who are in the gray area, like T1 to T2 and 2, T1 to T2 and 2 will be stage 3A. In some institutions, surgery is not done, or where the expertise is not available to do a radical surgery. T1, T2 with N2 nodes are also taken up for definitive chemoradiation. Patients who are T3 with N2, okay, if the N2 station is a single station, small node, then probably this very select group can be taken up for surgery. However, most patients with T3 and bulky N2 disease will go for definitive chemoradiation, and the surgery will not be done. But just to emphasize this point, all patients who have N2 disease, where we are planning to do surgery later on, the induction chemotherapy is mandatory. We should never venture into surgical procedure in patients who have pre-operatively detected N2 nodal positivity. So after neoadjuvant chemotherapy, it is downstaged, and then when there is no progression, the surgery can be done. In case of progression, the chemo radiation is given. And there are some studies where they say patients with N2 positive disease, we give preoperative neoadjuvant chemo radiation, excluding those superior sulcus tumors where we routinely do preoperative neoadjuvant chemo radiation. So tumors which are not in the superior sulcus area, some institutions they follow preoperative chemo radiation, but there is a recent like a recent study which was discussed in ASCO 2020 that patients who have preoperative neoadjuvant chemo radiation, they develop more complications, and their ultimately the survival is lower than patients who have preoperative neoadjuvant induction chemotherapy. So T3 and 2 nodes, as I discussed, most patients will go for definitive concurrent chemoradiation followed by immunotherapy. Now, special situations in locally advanced lung cancer, we find a separate nodule in the same lobe or a separate nodule in the ipsilateral non-primary lobe. So these patients, are difficult to differentiate whether these lesions are metastatic lesions from the primary tumor in the ipsilateral lobe, index lobe, or whether these lesions which are seen in the other lobe, whether these lesions are multiple primary tumors developing at the same time. So most such patients should not be denied surgery if they have ipsilateral, other lobe having a lesion. So we should do surgery and resect them, and then if they are N2 positive, then they receive chemotherapy and radiation. If they are just N0 or N1, they receive chemotherapy. So coming to stage 4 lung cancer with contralateral solitary lung nodules, if the histology is same, or even if the histology is different, they should be treated preferably as a 2 separate primary lung tumors, unless the evidence is largely in favor of a metastatic disease, because sometimes multiple primary tumors develop, and these patients will lose potentially curative option. So the investigations which are done for multiple primaries, same as the routine standard investigations. Okay, if the disease is outside the chest, then we send them for systemic therapy as for metastatic disease. And if the only problem is a contralateral lung nodule, then both are resected if they are operable. So as I discussed, the principles of surgical therapy are just briefly discussed as for the NCCN guidelines. So role of surgery in stage 3A and 2 lung cancer. Usually it's a controversial topic, especially in some institutions, like where the expertise is not available. 3A patients go for chemoradiation, but this is a group of patients where after neoadjuvant induction chemotherapy, we can do a radical surgery, and the survival is equivalent to patients who receive neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So I will not say survival is superior to concurrent chemoradiation, but it is as good as patients who receive concurrent chemoradiation with better local control. Okay, in concurrent chemoradiation, those patients who do not have, pathological CR, these patients will have local disease. Okay, whereas the local control or regional control will be much better in patients who have in the surgical arm. So commonly the problem what happens is we do the mediastinal staging, and after the mediastinal staging, we get to know it is N1 disease, and when we take up the patient for surgery, and we found some small N2 nodes. So the guidelines are that if we found N2 nodes on table and we have already opened the patient, open surgery, then we should complete the dissection, because these patients who have occult N2 disease, their prognosis is much better than patients who have frank N2 nodes detectable on preoperative imaging. However, if a patient is undergoing a video-assisted thoracoscopic procedure, then then the surgery can be abandoned, and neoadjuvant chemotherapy should be given to the patient, and then the definitive surgery should be performed subsequently. So whenever we have N2 nodes positive, we are always worried about the likelihood of positive N3 nodes. So we must do staging properly to avoid N3 nodes, because operating on a patient who has got occult N3 disease, patient will not have any survival benefit of surgery. Patient will have recurrence within 2-3 months, and it will be futile exercise to operate on these patients. So it is very important to do to follow guidelines diligently, and to do invasive staging. So now few important things to emphasize. This the highlighted area is, I think it's a small print, but I think you will be able to see. Study was done by NCCN, and they sent a questionnaire to their member institutions. This was done in 2010, but every year this thing is not deleted. This is still included every year, even in 2020 also, as part of the guidelines. And they sent this questionnaire, and they asked, would the surgeons consider surgery in patients with 1 and 2 lymph node stations? And 90% of NCCN member institutions, they do surgery for patients with single lymph node and 2 stations. So this can be considered standard of care. And number 2, whether they would perform surgery with more than 1 and 2 lymph node station being involved. The responses were almost 50%, 47%. They responded if the nodes were small and surgically removable. Then almost 50% institutions, they practice surgery for these after neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And restaging mediastinoscopy after neoadjuvant chemotherapy is practiced in 40% of institutions. Especially when a patient is assessed to require preoperatively pneumonectomy. So these patients usually are not given these patients are usually given chemotherapy, not neoadjuvant chemoradiation, because after neoadjuvant chemoradiation, if a patient requires pneumonectomy, then usually the salvage surgery is very complicated and can be very risky also. So now stage 3B, as I told you, T1, T2, any T with N3 disease, or T3, T4 with N2 disease. These patients, are treated best with chemoradiation. So quickly, we all know the preoperative preparation. We should ask the patient to discontinue smoking. We should assess the pulmonary reserve with pulmonary function test, ventilation perfusion scan if the pulmonary function test is borderline or not normal. Cardiac assessment, DVT prophylaxis. We must treat the obstructive pneumonitis, because most patients with central cancers, they have obstructive pneumonitis with a lot of microorganisms, and it should be treated with the appropriate culture specific antibiotics. Bronchodilators, spirometry. Patients should have good nutrition. Now the standard surgical procedure is lobectomy or bilobectomy, pneumonectomy. Wedge resection is not usually considered for patients who it's not considered radical procedure. It can be done for patients who are not suitable for medically suitable for radical surgery. Very important, sleeve resection is should be done whenever possible to save parenchyma, because if we do sleeve resection, we can avoid pneumonectomy in significant percentage of patients, and along with the mediastinal lymph node dissection. So limited resections are avoided because they have higher recurrence rates. I can skip this slide. So now coming to extended resections for patients who have adjacent organ involvement, like resection of the vertebral body. If it can be resected with negative margins, then this helps in prolonging the survival of the patient, and it's a curative resection. Resection of the chest wall and reconstruction with the mesh and the flap. Vascular resection, if there is a limited involvement of the superior vena cava or subclavian vessels, resection of the diaphragm, if it is involved, resection of pericardium, and patients who have proximal airway disease, carinal resection can be considered in patients who are young, and if you are sure that the disease can be resected with negative margins. So now, why lymph node dissection? Because it has been seen that the lymph node dissection improves staging of the procedure and it improves survival. As you can see, the survival of patients in these two studies was better with patients who had systematic lymph node dissection. And you know, the lymph node dissection in the mediastinum, the mediastinal dissection carries very little morbidity. It can be done quickly in half an hour's time. This is just to show you the lymph node stations. This is, you know, this lung resected in this area. This is the mediastinal area. This is the azygous vein. The station 2R and 4R. 2R is upper mediastinal, and this is the 4R, which is usually behind the azygous vein here. Now another patient, the station number 7. This is a subcarinal area. Periesophageal area, you can see this is the diaphragm, this is the pericardial fat, you know, lymph nodes around the esophagus and the inferior pulmonary ligament. These are the N1 nodes, hilar nodes. You can see this is the azygous vein. You know, this is the bronchus here, and these are the number 10 hilar, interlobar, and the lobar lymph nodes. So this is a picture of the carcinoma left lower lobe. This is the CT picture. You know, this patient had involvement of the, you know, it was not possible to do sleeve resection, so that is why we had to do pneumonectomy for this patient. This picture is just to show you that after pneumonectomy, using a intercostal muscle flap, you know, to cover the stump, reduces the incidence of bronchopleural fistula. So this is the anatomy. This is the aorta. You can see the PDA, ductus arteriosus here, and this is the, you know, stapled right left pulmonary artery, and this is the hilar dissection here, and this is the supra aortic dissection. This is a huge neuroendocrine carcinoma with N0 lymph nodes, no N2 nodes. Huge tumor. Just to show you the anatomy, upper lobectomy was done, and you can see that after dissection, the superior vena cava is bared here. You can see the brachiocephalic veins. This is the trachea. You can see the trachea has been, you know, dissected. All the lymph nodes, upper 2R, 2L, 2R and 4R removed. This is the brachiocephalic vein. This is the, you know, you can see the stump of the upper lobe removed, the specimen. You know, this principle of sleeve resection, when there is a tumor involving the upper lobe, involving up to the main bronchus, or with the involvement of main bronchus, we can dissect these two and join the lower lobe bronchus with the trachea. So this way we are able to save a lower lobe. Otherwise, you know, we would have done pneumonectomy for this. So this kind of resection, the survival and the post-operative mortality morbidity is, you know, much you know, lesser in patients who undergo sleeve resection compared to patients who undergo pneumonectomy. So sleeve resection of the left upper lobe, you know, this is a diagram just to, you know, show how do we do it. Upper lobe is resected. You know, we take sleeve of the bronchus and, you know, anastomose. This is a wedge bronchoplasty where we don't resect the entire bronchus. We just take a, you know, wedge, and then we anastomose it, we suture it. You know, this is an example of a patient with a, you know, favorable tumor, carcinoid tumor involving the right upper lobe. You can see a huge tumor here involving the right upper lobe, almost going very close to the carina, and you can see the superior vena cava. This is ascending aorta. It is involving superior vena cava in this area. You know, because these neuroendocrine tumors, they have better prognosis, they're slow growing, they rarely metastasize to distant organs. Even if they metastasize, the prognosis is still better. So in these patients, we should do aggressive resections. You see this trachea has been, you know, this flush with the trachea. We have divided the bronchus here, and this is the distal segment of the bronchus here, and this is the patch graft on the superior vena cava. The patch has been taken from the pericardium, and this bronchus will be anastomosed or sutured to the main trachea. So you can see the anastomosis of the trachea and the bronchus being done, interrupted sutures, and this will close this, and in that way we have avoided a major pneumonectomy, and we have otherwise this patient would have been inoperable. Similarly, on the left side, the left-sided tumors, they have tendency to involve the pulmonary artery commonly more compared to right side. You see this left pulmonary artery is involved here with this tumor here. So this patient was treated with neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and then the surgery was performed. The pulmonary artery involving that, the involved pulmonary artery, a patch was resected, you can see here, and then a pericardium was taken, and pericardial patch was applied here. So that way we could save the left lower lobe and the morbidity and mortality associated with the left pneumonectomy. So we call it left PA patch reconstruction. So with the help of these bronchoplastic procedure and the vascular resection and the vascular reconstruction, we call them sleeve resections. So compared to pneumonectomy, the complications were much less in sleeve resection patients compared to patients who had pneumonectomies. So whenever possible, we must try to save the parenchyma and do parenchymal sparing procedures. There are a lot of studies. There is no controversy on this issue, that the complications are much less in patients who undergo bronchial or pulmonary artery sleeve resection. So another patient with the left-sided tumor, involvement of the pulmonary artery, this resected pulmonary artery and the patch graft. We can resect sleeve of the pulmonary artery and put a sleeve reconstructed from the pericardium. So I have discussed about Pancoast tumor. I'll just show a few pictures. So we give neoadjuvant chemotherapy and radiation followed by surgery. The surgery for the Pancoast tumor is lobectomy, chest wall resection, involving first 3 or 4 ribs. Sometimes we have to resect vertebral body. Sometimes vascular resection is done for tumors which are which are favorable with favorable histology, or tumor or cancers which have limited spread to the vessel. Spread means contiguous involvement, and the reconstruction is done by a flap, usually the latissimus dorsi flap and a mesh. This patient had I operated this patient in 2010, apical lobe tumor with involvement of the first 3 ribs rather. Third rib was abutting and the first 2 ribs were involved. Patient presented with severe pain, 53-year-old gentleman. We gave him neoadjuvant chemotherapy and radiation, 45 gray, then we did surgery. You can see the massive thoracotomy extending from anterior to posteriorly, and you can see first 3 ribs have been separated. You see, this is the chest wall and this is the lung. Upper lobectomy has been done. The chest wall is being resected. This is the vertebral area where the transverse processes are being divided. You see the divided rib, and if you see closely, when we resect superior sulcus tumors, we have to take care of the brachial plexus. This is the C8T1 nerve root. You see, it's such a thick nerve root. Okay, almost slightly less than diameter of a little finger. So this nerve root is safeguarded. You can see the divided transverse process of the vertebra. Here this nerve root is coming, so it is safeguarded, and you can see the entire chest wall resected along with the lobe. This is the upper lobe, and this is the cuff of the chest wall all around, like a umbrella over it. This is the resected specimen, upper lobe and the apical chest wall. So this huge defect was reconstructed with the help of a mesh. You can see the chest wall was approximated. A mesh was placed over that. This is the serratus muscle. which was used to cover, and the rest of the thing was covered by a latissimus dorsi muscle flap. In such a huge thoracotomy also, we save the latissimus dorsi muscle and then use it for reconstruction here. So this is a post-operative X-ray, very interesting. You can see, this side complete chest, and this side, the chest is smaller now. The upper, apical region has been dissected. So this, just to say that these T4, lesions, I already discussed this issue. Now, just to show a patient with great vessel involvement, superior vena cava reconstruction can be done because these T4 lesions with N0, lymph nodes, they have better prognosis compared to patients with N2 disease. A patient with vertebral involvement and the chest wall involvement, you can see the vertebra has been resected and a cage placed to stabilize the spine. And this procedure is done by neurosurgeons, this placement of cage. So we involve a neurosurgeon in our team. Now, coming to minimally invasive surgery, though it is a paradox, I'm discussing about this locally advanced lung cancer. I don't prefer to do neoadjuvant, I do not prefer to do minimally invasive surgery in patients who have got advanced lung cancer. But still, I think Dr. Mandal requested me to tell you something about minimally invasive surgery. So it's late, so I'll just discuss about the specific indications. Usually it is done for early stage lung cancer. Either it can be done thoracoscopically or it can be done through robotic surgery. The surgical procedure remains same. Lobectomy with mediastinal lymph node dissection. The surgery remains same. The approach is different. We use minimally invasive approach, and the advantages are quick recovery, okay, less post-operative pain, better pulmonary function, better immune function. But these things are minimally invasive surgery should be used judiciously, because most Indian lung cancer patients are not suitable for minimally invasive surgery, except for patients who have small peripheral tumors, T1, T2 peripheral tumors, or T1 central tumors. What we get normally are stage 3A patients with central disease involving or maybe very close to the pulmonary artery. Sometimes the minimally invasive surgery in such patients, if not used judiciously, can be disastrous. So the bottom line is, for early lung cancer, yes, minimally invasive surgery is good. It helps in recovery. So now the common incisions, we give a small thoracotomy incision, 4 or 5 centimeter, and then different ports are used, depending upon the surgeon's preference. So we use staplers to to staple the pulmonary artery, bronchus, and pulmonary veins. Different ports. You can see the utility incision and the camera port here, the working channel here, and another working channel here. Like this, you see, we did not, this patient, that mini thoracotomy was done later on. There were 4 ports, 1, 2, 3, 4. We used it for thoracoscopic dissection, followed by a small mini thoracotomy to take out the specimen. So I will show you, this is again the same thing, minimally invasive procedure. I will show you some clips of robotic surgery, robotic lobectomy being done. This is important, the specimen endobag. All specimens should be, brought out through the, wound with the help of endobag only to avoid contamination of the wound. So you can see, we just discussed about a patient with a Pancoast tumor. We did the surgery. You can see a big incision compared to a patient who underwent minimally invasive surgery. The scars do not appear good because of the recent, surgery and these, slight hemorrhagic ecchymotic patches under the scars. But otherwise, after the final healing, the scars turned out to be very well. You can see this patient winging of the scapula. This patient underwent Pancoast tumor surgery with chest wall resection, and because serratus was denervated, in the dissection. So this is the winging of scapula seen. Now coming to robotic surgery, it's technically superior to laparoscopy and other minimally invasive procedures. Less pain, faster recovery, and the safety is similar to open surgery, provided the patient selection is done judiciously. The chances of infection are less bleeding, and less scarring. The cost is definitely higher. Cost is definitely prohibitive because robotic surgery, consumables are sometimes used only once. So the disposable consumables usually cost around 80 to 1 lakh rupees. So this is a Da Vinci Robo. You can see a main camera arm and the other robotic arms, arm number 1, 2, and 3. These arms are draped into sterile drapes, and they are docked into the patient, and the surgery is performed by the surgeon sitting at a distant distance from the patient, and the assistant usually has nothing much to do. So you can see the assistant relaxing here. So the surgeon sits on, this is a console, this is a 3D monitor where we visualized everything in 3 dimension, magnified several times. The surgeon sits comfortably on a chair without scrubbing up. You can see, these are knobs, both sides, which surgeon has to manipulate in order to move the robotic arm inside the patient's body. This is a closer look at the we can call it joysticks, or usually, these are master controllers where you can see the position. The surgeon holds the master controllers like this, and the opening and closing of this finger and the thumb, we can grasp the tissue and open it, and you can see the multiple joints. It's quite flexible. When we move these robotic arms, these master controllers, the robotic arms move inside the patient's body exactly in the same manner. If we have tremors in our hand, we can minimize the tremors with the help of scaling, and the movement here will be more, whereas inside the patient's body, the transmitted tremors will be much less, 3 times less. So you can see the surgeon sits here, and the procedure goes on at a different site. The main advantage is these robotic instruments are called endo wrist instruments. It's like patient's wrist or our wrist. The normal human wrist has 5 degrees of motion, whereas the robotic arm has 7 degrees of motion. We can have flexion, extension, medial, lateral deviation, and a circumduction. Whereas robotic arms, this can rotate on its own axis 360 degrees. So the maneuverability is tremendous. So this is just to share our data. This is recent data we have to compile. 2005 lobectomies, pneumonectomy in 56 cases, 60-day mortality after pneumonectomy is 2 out of 56, 3.5%, whereas 60-day mortality in lobectomy was 0.6%. As you can see, this is as per the international standard, where the pneumonectomy was 4%, 3 to 4% mortality, and lobectomy mortality is around 1 to 2%. I will quickly, go to show you some video to try this thing, robotic surgery. This is a patient of renal cell cancer involving the left lower lobe. So this is this robotic. This focus is not there, but this will soon be corrected. You can see the Can you see Dr. Mandal?
Sir, you need to share this video.
See the video?
Yes, you have to share it again.
Dr. Mandal?
Sir, you have to share this video screen once again.
Like this, okay?
Just a moment.
Sir, you can now share screen again and then select the video. Yes, it is visible.
Can you see, Dr. Mandal?
Yes. Yes, sir, it is visible.
I think the focus will improve slowly. These are the ports being placed under the ribs. Sorry for the poor quality here, but I think the quality will improve. So these are the ports being placed. So I will just show you the dissection of the pulmonary artery. You see these are the robotic arms, the grasper, and this is the dissector, the fine tip dissector. We are making space in the fissure. This is the upper lobe, this is the lower lobe. The fissure dissection is being done. The lower lobe is retracted with the third arm, and you can see this is the pulmonary artery dissected here. This is the pulmonary artery in the interlobar area, which is dissected. This is the upper lobe. This is the hilum. This is the hilar area. This is you can see the heart under the pericardium. This is the phrenic nerve. And this interlobar pulmonary artery comes. You can see the branches of the pulmonary artery being given to the upper lobe. Now the the anterior part is being visualized. This is the hilar area. You just have a look at the maneuverability of these instruments. There are two joints, one here and one here. So these two joints, they move independently of each other. Plus along the axis, it can rotate 360 degrees. And this is the dissector. You can see, it can be moved like a finger. So this is the dissected pulmonary artery here. These are the branches going to the lower lobe. We are able to hold the lung like our fingers, with the help of our fingers, similar to that. But the problem with robotic surgery is that we don't have sensation. If we are holding lung, then we should be really we should take care not to hold it tightly. Otherwise, we will not feel it, but the lung will get crushed. This is the inferior pulmonary vein being dissected. You can see the tissue around, surrounding the inferior pulmonary vein. These are the lymph nodes, station 9 lymph nodes being sampled there. The cautery is being used to minimize bleeding. The assistant introduces, to take out these lymph nodes. The assistant stands there, and these lymph nodes are, handed over to assistant. So I think this is just to show you the, the technique of robotic surgery. If you have any questions, I'll be very happy to answer your questions.